Anyway, so we're going to be talking about the right to own land. Just remind ourselves that we have an inalienable right that's unchangeable. It is there for us. And out of all those inalienable rights, and there's more, but we put the big ones up there, we have property. We have the right to own property. We see that in nature, so therefore it's given to us under God. Friedrich Hayek says an essential condition for the prevention of coercion. A people averse to the institution of private property is without the first element of freedom. Nobody is at liberty to attack private property and to say at the same time that he values civilization. History of the two cannot be disentangled. Back in Greek times, you could stay on your property even if the tyrant was ruling and wanted you into the jail or wherever. If you stayed on your property, he couldn't touch you. It was just a given. That's how much private property is very important. But of course, over the last since World War II, there has been an erosion of that in our minds. Anyone that's been in the school system since World War II is starting to have our absolutes eroded. Now, we met Focus, didn't we? 606, he gave the papacy his spiritual power. Well, I'm going to introduce you to a new chap, just as tyrannical as Focus, and his name is King Pepin. And Charlemagne was his son. And it was Charlemagne that named Europe after Europa, ancient mystery goddess. Always debauched, as Europa was, and even the EU now has, outside both their parliamentary buildings and the other building, can't remember the name of it, they have Europa and the bull there. And one of them, you'll see Europa with the hands up like that, which is a part of a symbol of ancient mystery goddesses normally, but they didn't want to be too blatant. Normally there'd be a snake in each hand and maybe boggly eyes. But this is Europa, all this one world religion coming into being. So Charlemagne was a fierce defender of the papacy, but this is his dad, Pepin. In 756, Pepin, through trickery from the Vatican, Pepin couldn't read, but apparently the Pope had sent letters written in gold to Pepin, and apparently St. Peter himself had sent this letter down from heaven that Pepin must come and help against the Lombards. So Pepin gave the papacy his temporal power. So that means now the papacy owns every little bit of land. He owns the seabed, the foreshore, and the land. And this is why when we buy our house and we spend 20 or 30 years paying off the mortgage, all we own is the little bit of paper, just the title. We do not own the land at all. It's all done through trickery, through our birth certificate and our all caps, because we're just a corporation. That's all we own. That's why we pay rates. We're paying the landlord his rent. That's why we need to ask the council before we can do anything, because we've got to get permission from an agent of the owner. And this was Pepin. And again, you can sort of think, well, if one person gave him all this power, or two people, well, we'll just take it back. I kind of thought that for a while, but let's see what happens here. So here we are. Hi there, Mr. Pope. Now, he's looking dapper here. He's got his pine cone on, which is an ancient mystery fertility symbol. The biggest pine cone in the world is in St. Peter's Square. And he's got his triple crown on, just to make sure there's no doubt that he's the ruler of the ruler of the ruler. So he's got his triple crown there, or is also known as a tiara. And that's to remind everyone that he is God over the earth, over hell, over the earth, and over heaven. And he's also God over our spirit, soul, and body. Done. Even the Jesuits here, in their writings, we find out that fascism, which is actually communism. I know most people think it's right-wing. No, it is not. Fascism and communism both sit on Marxism. Fascism is the regime that corresponds most closely to the concepts of the Church of Rome. And all part of that is no ownership, or maybe a little bit if you're careful. That's Mussolini was bringing that in. Just to remind us, anything that comes out of the UN, the papacy endorses, including the abolition of property. It's just not Christian, don't you know? Karl Marx says the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. So there it is, hidden in plain sight. We've read about Tarpley saying, how did we, after 500 years of Christianity, and you could say 1,000 years, but particularly once we got out of the Dark Ages of Christianity, we find ourselves back to where we started with Diocletian. And the answer is because the United Nations Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, they are the same thing. They dovetail. It's the founding document and then the document of the how to do, really. It's Agenda 2030, and you would have seen what's coming out of the World Economic Forum. By 2030, you'll own nothing and you will be happy. So what they're really saying is by 2030, you'll own nothing and you will be happy. That's it. And particularly if you've had this and you're sitting under the 5G and you're drinking the fluoridation, you probably will be very happy. But this is a new agenda for a sustainable world. Okay, so what you've got to remember, it's we the people that have to be sustainable. So that is in code for absolute control. Now, Jim Bolger signed us into Agenda 21 in 1992. It wasn't binding, but the biodiversity assessment was, and we were signed into that as well. In 2015, John Key signed us into Agenda 2030, which was binding. So let's have a look at the diversity assessment, and we find it's a tiny, it's 1,125 pages. It's massive. You wade your way through it. But I've found this little thing here about property rights. The object of the property relationship is often a biological resource, land, tree, wildlife, crops, and so on. The property relationship may then be based around obtaining, guaranteeing, or controlling access to resource, essentially securing the rights to deriving value from it by either use or exchange. Property rights are not absolute. Whoa, okay. There it is, because I guess the Pope has decided he wants some of his land back. If you believe the late Rosa Corey, who wrote Behind the Green Mask, when she had an interview here a couple of years ago with Vinnie Eastwood, she believes there'll be no one living in New Zealand in the end. We'll all be Māori, non-Māori, will all be shipped offshore, except for the few that will change beds at the ski lodges, etc. But we're all going to be shipped out because we're part of that green belt that sort of works its way around the world. I tend to agree with her from what I'm seeing thus far, and we'll look at that shortly. So here we go on another page. And it talks about that property rights can still be allocated to environmental public goods. Let me see. Oh, there it is. Public goods. But in this case, they should be restricted to usufructual or user rights. So that really is an ancient word that was, again, pretty much in BC times, where you had the right to live on the land, and while you were around, you could call it your own, but, you know, get permission just the same. It was provisionally given. And we're seeing that even today, not so much in New Zealand yet, but in Britain, where you have estate taxes and death taxes. And in Britain, you have to pay your death taxes on a property before you can even sell it. So if you can't sell the property to pay the estate fees, then you lose or forfeit it, or at least according to friends of ours that had to go through that process there. So this is all part of that land grab. It's all part of that usufructual that they know is established, but we haven't quite learnt yet. Now, the other thing is we're already 2 years into the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration. You might have noticed over the last nearly 100 years, they always have decades of this and decades of that. Well, we're 2 years into the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration. So you've got to kind of listen to the words here, because it's not renovation. When you're going to renovate a house, you bring it up to 21st century standards and the way you would like to live. Restoration is as it was when it was first built. So if you think that about the earth, about our country, restoration means pre-human. And there's a lot of documentation coming out of UN and New Zealand that is talking about pre-human. We might see some of that now. But there's pathways too, by the way. So I've got all these pathways. You can see how they're doing it through education, partnering with youth, working with educators, showcasing flagships and champions, unlocking and reorientating finances. You know, that means banking. If you don't have your eco-friendly plan, you're not going to get any funding. And it goes on and on and on. So pathway 1 down to pathway 3, totally sorted. There's no wiggle room for we the people. Now the other thing, as I said, ancient mystery religion, its seat is pantheism. So we have Mithraism, but the seat is pantheism. And pantheism is that we worship our creation rather than the creator. Pantheism is about worshipping fauna and flora and seeing our place within that. So again, you know, like the Vatican, ancient mystery religion, thin veil of Christianity, this is what United Nations are doing. Because United Nations is the shopfront of all things evil. United Nations is the shopfront for the Vatican. If the Vatican came straight on, head on with us, we would think, oh, been here in history before, not buying this one. This way, Trojan horse, United Nations, and we'll do all our play for power through that, hence the Pope being on board with it. So Gaia, pantheism is the worship of Mother Gaia. Gaia is Mother Earth. He was at a synod a couple of years ago, and there's Pachamama that comes out of the South America. The bishops were asked, "Oh, is that mother, virgin and baby?" And they said, "No. Let's make this very clear. This has got nothing to do with Mary and Jesus. This is about Gaia." So again, they're saying what is really happening. They're not disguising it anymore. We know exactly that this Christian veil is starting to come off as they emerge with this one world religion, which was the primary start or reason for the creation of United Nations. That's why UNESCO was put into place very quickly. They spearhead the bringing in of a one world religion around the globe. So we have Gaia. So Pachamama has been hobbled, and so is Papatūānuku. When we went to a campsite a few weeks ago, that was there at the door, respect Papatūānuku, recycle. Well, of course we're good stewards of the land. And when we have Papatūānuku safely nestled in her cultural place, we love her. But what they're doing is they're making Papatūānuku Gaia, and they're putting it into the globalist cultural place. Whole different ball game. And this is what they do. Pagan Rome did it. When they conquered, they said, look, just keep all your gods, but this is the temple we'll have, so we just, it's like McDonald's, it's going to be the same all over the world, but you just keep your names. That's why we've got Isis and Ishtar being the same goddess. So it is confusing, and that's what they're doing again now, coming through the United Nations. So that should be an alert to us. So here in New Zealand, we have Ardern's audit of the country so that her bosses at United Nations know how close we are to total control by 2030. I think they're running a little bit behind schedule, but she is the poster child for United Nations Agenda 2030, so she is determined. Rest of the world's relaxing a bit on masks and all these other things, but oh no, not this woman. She is driven because she's determined to meet her master's goals as a puppet prime minister. New Zealand's progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And I never expected anyone to read it, and even when you go online, I just printed this offline, very hard to read. It's not user-friendly, but it goes through each of the Sustainable Development Goals, letting the boss know how close we are to total lockdown across the board. No one, she says, is going to be left behind. And a bit like you will be happy, no one will be left behind. It's a bit like that naughty child that's a bit slow getting into the car. That's what's going to happen. And in fact, she talks about how, in her speech at the Bill and Melinda Gates Sustainable Development or Goals Conference in 2019, that we need to look how we can help people as they transition. So I'm thinking, so we're talking about, we're going to bring the army in, we're going to help people. No, you're not going to help people. You're going to make sure people do go. Because ancient mystery religion all comes, as you know, as I've said, Osiris. Pharaoh was Osiris on this earth, and on the sarcophaguses, they always had their hands across like this, and you see that's Osiris. And usually Pharaoh had a crook in this hand and had a flail in this hand. So people are led. This is how they do it with the crook. So if we're led to, put on your masks, lock down. Now, the minute we don't obey, out comes the flail. And that's what we saw in Wellington. The crook for the good ones and the flail for those dissenters. So no one is going to be left behind as far as she and our government is concerned, even though there's no guarantee of success. Some of you may have seen this. This came out briefly. United Nations put it out. There was a human outcry in America, and it was whisked offline very quickly, but the copies, of course, got round. All the red areas are no-go human areas. The orange, yellowy areas are the buffer, so you need to get a permit, and you won't get that easily. The little grey areas you can hardly see, they are, let me just get that right. Green areas that you can hardly see, that's for normal use, bless them. And those are where the big cities are. Then, of course, we've got reservations and the military reservations as well. Now, I haven't seen one like this for New Zealand, but can jolly be sure there's one already there. And I will show you in a minute what I think our first no-go zone area is coming down the pipe. All the biodiversity strategies that come out of United Nations are usually backed up through the different countries. And there's several New Zealand biodiversity strategies, another one in 2020, but this one's kind of telling because that kind of buys into having the right to rule and having the right to be ruled. So firstly, we find out that the advisory committee to provide advice on an agreed set of measures. So they've agreed them. It doesn't mean they've agreed with us through dialogue. They've agreed on those measures for effectively sustaining biodiversity on private land. So tough. Don't care what you have to say. They've agreed on strategies, and it is coming. The committee will lead dialogue. So that's code for the committee will let you know as a landlord what you're allowed to do and what you aren't allowed to do. End of story. And we will legislate, and we will take you to court, and we will pump you dry of your money, you debt slave you. Now, in the same document here, we find out exactly where we fit in. Humans share a common whakapapa with other animals and plants. People are therefore part of nature and biodiversity. So this is this Aristotle and Darwinian view that they have of us, that we are nothing more than human cattle. We're just nothing more than the biosphere that we're in and the biodiversity, and it is their job to tell us what hoops to jump through and where we can live and where we can't live, which is exactly what they're about to do. So we've got these sorts of documents as well, and we learn a little bit more propaganda. Māori arrived in the land that was almost entirely swathed in forest. However, the burning of forest stands meant conversion to tussock grasslands and scrub. Then the European settlers cleared much of what forest remained in the lowlands, and it goes on. So we're already starting to get the soft end of that flail. Yeah, it's people. Look, New Zealand was wonderful. They have this pantheistic view is that, a bit like the Georgia Guidestones that was blown up recently, we are a cancer on this earth. And so we need to be controlled, and we need to be told off and put into human settlements, which what these super cities are. That's what Auckland is. It's a super city. United Nations calls that a human settlement. And it is man's fault. How dare we clear some forest so that we can put a house down or a town down. New Zealand already has over 40% still in native forests, so it's not as if we're completely destroyed this world. Then we're talking about natural solutions, so it's got to be natural. So we can't have anything that we, the people, might seem to do to combat erosion, for example. That would be a good one. It's got to be natural. So if you're going to bring something in to combat erosion, that's not going to pass muster with councils. It's got to be natural solution. So it's another soft way of running us out of town. Sustainable Development Goals, and it's done through the IUC and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which bypasses our voting system and goes straight to councils. And we see that here in Christchurch. As really it is a sustainable Rockefeller city now. Rockefeller came in when it needed its rebuilding and it put in protocols and structures to be part of the sustainable city, or future cities as they call it as well. So here are the Sustainable Development Goals. They're to sustain us, keep us under control. A lot of them have ancient mystery religion symbolism there, in code, of course, but it's there. I can see the Ouroboros twice in 10 and 12. The gender, both those symbols, although normally we see them separated when we're looking at it medically, they are actually ancient mystery religious symbols. We have the Eye of Cyrus there, we've got sun worship. It's all there, even the dove. So it's couched in their language for signaling to their esoteric knowledge of those that they are talking to. And then we interpret this as something quite different. And we agree with most of them. Of course, we've got no poverty and zero hunger, but their means to gaining that is quite different than our means. It's the Hegelian dialectic. First we starve the people, then we bring it over here and we make everyone else pay to feed these people. Then we have total control with taxation, etc. It's always this Hegelian dialectic. And just in case you think you can wiggle out of anything, they've got the 3 E's that we've got to live within, which is social equity, environmental equity, and economic equity. And each of those, equitable, viable, bearable, and must be sustainable. So we're having to jump through hoops that are near impossible. And I say it this way, bearable, you know, if I went to the dentist, it would be bearable, but I don't want to live like that for the rest of my life. Well, guess what? That's exactly what they're expecting us to live like. And then hopefully the next generation, with all their vaccines and all their fluoridation, won't complain anymore.
UN's sustainability is by definition unsustainable.
It is totally unsustainable, yeah. And there are, like that quote of Ardern's and other people, they shake their head, the movers and shakers shake their head, or at least the middle management of the movers and shakers around the world. They know it's impossible, but it doesn't matter, because remember, they live at a completely different level than us. They're just going ahead. Doesn't matter, because we are just cannon fodder. We're of nothing. We're collateral damage. So public ownership, this is UN Habitat, public ownership or effective control of land in the public interest and single most important means of achieving a more equitable distribution. So when we're talking about social equity, we've also got to understand that when they're talking about community, they're talking about global community, because we're globalized. So it means if someone in Africa can't afford a house, then it's not social equity if we afford a house here in New Zealand. Everything's global community now. It's just a one look. It's got to cover everyone. So what does it look like in New Zealand? Well, we had the Christchurch earthquakes, as many of you probably lived through. It would appear from documentation coming from WikiLeaks that it was indeed on cue. It was a man-made earthquake. John Key said twice in his speech, man-made, natural disaster. They had to destroy Christchurch so that they could rebuild their resilient city. It shocked me. I thought, Christchurch, fancy that. Then I kind of thought, well, it won't be Wellington, because that's their political seat, and it can't be Auckland, that's their financial seat. So why not Christchurch? And particularly because, remember, they've got to destroy Protestant Christianity. If you've got a name like Christchurch, you're going to be a sitting duck. And of course, they've got to get that cathedral gone. We can't have something like that sitting there disturbing their sensitivities in any way, shape or form. So we're also, in her review and in a lot of other rhetoric, hearing again and again that we're very, living in a volatile world, and hazards and earthquakes and storms. This is a different sort of world we live in, so we've got to expect these things. So they preempt any thoughts that it might be man-made at all. But that's Christchurch is the first off the bat in New Zealand. When you go in and see the different movers and shakers that have been part of Christchurch rebuilding, you'll find Rockefeller's name nicely there, and bypassing voting. So then we have another land grab. So that's one land grab, because we had those red zones. Some people lost everything and were never allowed to go back. Job done. Lives ruined. Doesn't matter. We just collateral damage. Next one is significant natural areas. A friend of mine in New Plymouth chopped down some trees on her property, and right there in the middle of New Plymouth. You've always got some nice neighbours that will dob you in, because that's what it's all about. You don't need a big police force, you just need indoctrinated plebs, and they will dob anyone in that they deem fit to, that have overstepped the mark or haven't kept the policies going. So they got a visit, and it was umming and ahhing whether they were going to be heavily fined. Anyway, they hadn't got their protocols in place, so they were let off this time. This is their land they paid for. And as you can see, it is a problem. And the thing with significant natural areas is fauna and flora have no appreciation for boundaries, no appreciation for fences, no appreciation for one person's property to another. So this isn't about protecting wildlife, this is about allowing it to grow. So in a few years' time, they'll peg the significant natural areas out even further. Some farms are losing up to 80% of their farms that they're no longer able to utilise. Endangered of going under, and again, job done as far as the elites are concerned. Another land grab is invasive species. So whenever they put these kind of articles out, we've always got a rat or a stoat, and we can all agree that, yes, we would like to see less of that and get rid of those invasive species. But invasive alien species are species that have been moved by humans. So when they're talking about getting rid of invasive species, they're talking about cattle and horses, sheep, dogs, cats, anything we brought here. So that little rat picture, it's a deceiving picture to make you think it's nothing to see here, people. So there it is. And human well-being, well, we know we're now part of the biodiversity, and when you look at UN documentation, we have the same rights as a rock, the same rights as a stream or a river. So when they're talking about well-being, which seems to be Ardern's favourite word, you don't see yourself as well-being in the traditional sense. See yourself as just part of the ecosystem as a rock. What would the well-being for a rock look like? Then you'll know exactly what she's talking about. So we're protecting our places, and wouldn't you know it, New Zealand's at-risk native plants and animals, some of our most rare and threatened ecosystems and species are now found only on private property. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed? And we kind of accept it. And part of that now is making sure that our farming, Dern said that cows' dairy was of yesteryear. They're coming for our farms with all the nitrates and all the other resource management hoops they've got to jump through. When we were in Britain, a multi-million-dollar advertising went in to turn as many people in Britain vegan as they possibly could. Already here in New Zealand, Satan, laboratory-made food is already in New Zealand. I have a vegan friend who sells it in her cafe, and you can see that there's, again, hidden in plain sight. We might think, oh, don't be silly, it's just a weird spelling, and we pronounce it the same, but it's got nothing to do with ancient mystery religion and the worship of Satan. Yet their merchandise makes it very clear exactly what it's about. So we'll be eating Satan as part, and who knows, or the stories that are coming out at McDonald's, who knows what we're actually eating, actually. But it's all about getting everyone off the ecosystem, because poor old Gaia is sick. You know how children might get worms. Oh, poor old Gaia, she's got humans. So we've got to dose those humans and get them out. I've seen memes where a doctor's looking at the world and says, let's hope, what you need is 3 tsunamis a day to rid you of your, humans. So it might be funny and amusing, but it's impacting upon younger children as they're getting that subliminal message. So as they're telling us that the ecosystem needs saving and it's all our fault, don't you know, even though they traded our glass milk bottles out and stopped us having rubbish fires in our back garden, but they're putting 1080 all over us. They are making farmers jump through impossible hoops for the nitrates that are less going out of their farms than they are coming in, and that if you allow a lot of these waterways to go back to native birds, there's more nitrates being produced than our cows. And also we have geoengineering. And for those that don't believe it, here's one of the movers and shakers of the company himself, David Keith. And, we kill 1 million a year, but, it's a risk-by-risk basis, and we have to make those calls to save the planet. You get the feeling that they're actually not trying to save the planet, they're just trying to get rid of us. Then another land grab is the Resource Management Act. And it tells us here that the Resource Management Act has a key role, not of looking after us and what we might want to do on our land, but of managing our biological diversity. Almost all forms of resource use affect Indigenous biodiversity, and biodiversity is recognised in the Act in many ways. And here we go. So it's got nothing to do with us. It's got to do with jumping or paint by numbers, really, so that if there's an act, if there's a legislation, we must honour that. If we've signed the Paris Agreement, we must honour that. And in Dern's voluntary national review, that's what she always defers to. Some treaty, some convention that we've signed, we're gaining traction for this, we're going to be on target, got nothing to do with we the people, we are going down. So then the other problem we have is if you think that you've got a way that you can find through Resource Management Act, well, they've made sure through the precautionary approach there's no loophole, because you've got to prove there will be no harm to the microbes. You've got to prove that some ancient worm that only lives on your land and nowhere else in the world won't be harmed. And you can't do that. It's impossible for you to ever prove that. And that's why the banks, he's moved on now. He was the last CEO of the Bank of England. And even in New Zealand, if you've got a business package, you've got to prove that it's sustainable. How are you going to do that with your emissions? Costing you untold money in taxes. You will be punished and you will go bankrupt. Because really, they're not interested in us. They just want the big corps. I boycott malls. Have you ever been in there? You don't see any local, well, not up where we are, you see no local shops. They're all the international corps. And there's a horrible, even my daughters, they're all in their 20s, they hate malls. There's a horrible feel in a mall. It's quite ugly. And it's a bit debauched too, the way they've put a lot of their big posters on the wall and the way they do it. It's a very airy, weird place to be. So no, they're not getting my money. And then the other way to do a land grab is what they call the retreat policy, or managed retreat. And we've got friends on coastlines that are slowly being eroded. Their neighbours actually picked up their whole house and moved it back several metres, because this is in Gisborne, Wainui, yeah. along the beach there. And they all came together. This is about 10 or 15 years ago. They all came together and put big boulders to save their fronts. And so the council came with a action against them, took them to court. And you'll notice here, legislation and governments drive the managed retreat decision-making process, in effect where the managed retreat will be supported financially and socially. Because there's whispers that if you're on one of these properties, it's going to be your job to have your house removed on your money. They're not going to help. So they're just going to work that out. They don't want us near the sea. They don't want us near the rivers. We need to start moving back. They want the rivers swimmable, but it doesn't mean we're going to swim in them, by the way. That's just their language. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, we've got this double-prong thing where, it's all about carbon. We passed a poster the other day there, and it said, be careful in the forest. Careful with our forest, it's saving the world, something like that. Pine forests don't save diddly squat. They kill ecosystems, particularly in New Zealand. Nothing to do with our natural fauna and flora. If they were interested in New Zealand's ecology, they wouldn't be putting pine forests up. And this goes right back sneakily to the 1980s when they were working ways of how they were going to do a land grab through this sort of wilding process. And this wilding is something that's really real. Some of you may know about the Waikato Summit. I live in the Waikato. They had meetings there in Waikato in 2020. They've also got the Waikato Progress Indicators that the Treasury are in charge of. So they obviously haven't got enough on their minds, so they've decided to go into social engineering as well. But this is a very interesting area. Waikato per hectare produces more milk, more vegetables, more fruit than any other area of the country. It's typical for the elite to go for the best first. That's why most of Mexico is living in poverty, because they're not allowed to access their crazy rich resources that they're sitting on, because the elite want those. So they're coming for us, and I often wonder how they're going to get rid of us. We live in a little hydro village, and I think what they'll do is the siren will go, and early one morning around 3 o'clock, there'll be a boom, boom, boom on the door, evacuation, evacuation, the dam's going to go, and we will be hauled out, and we won't get back, just like what happened here with the earthquakes, because they're running us out of town. The other reason I know that is because we've got the Waikato Expressway. And when you look at the on and off ramps as you're going from, say, Auckland to Tauranga, they're highly banked up, so you can't see anywhere. Yes, you can get off and you can get on at the moment, but that won't stay, because we know from Obama all those on and off ramps were closed down. When you go the southern motorway up to Auckland, there's big barriers that looks good for the residents, stop that noise, but really what it's doing is training us to look forward. Nothing to see here, because they're wilding the Waikato, and we won't be allowed to get on there. And the other reason why I believe this to be so is when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals for the Waikato, there's 4 missing. There's number 5, which is gender equality. Well, you don't need that if no one's living there. There's number 9, industry and infrastructure. Don't need that if no one's living there. Peace and justice, number 16, and partnership, Ardern's favourite, number 17. So that to me is an absolute clincher. We're out of there. It's only a matter of time. So there's a lot of pressure being put on our farming people there. Also, it's worthy of noting, talking about us as just chattel, in 2018, Ardern office brought out this document, the start of a conversation on the value of New Zealand's human capital. Now that's what you might do on your farm. What's my capital? How I'm going to breed from those ones. Those can go to the top paddock. All these ones will go to the abattoir. This is basically what we're doing. And Davos is now doing this globally as well. We are nothing to them. We need to wake up pretty quickly, I believe. So again, this is what we're coming back to if we're not careful. We're coming back to a situation where the dissenters will be removed. So the sleeping will carry on with the narrative. They say 30% of a population is awake, 30% will never wake, but there's that 40% in there that we can try and wake. And I think what I'm hearing, that 40% is starting to rouse, you know. So it's worth just, tiptoeing around people, just throwing something in there, seeing how it goes. When we were on the ferry coming over, there was a couple sat in front of us there, and of course, what are you doing? So I thought I'll just quietly start off with Agenda 21. We'll see how we go with that one. Yeah. So blank looks. No, never heard of that. Okay. So yeah. So then carefully chose my next question. And anyway, the bottom line is they're going to come to my meeting in Wanaka. So there we go. So brace yourself. Yeah. Yeah. But they were alarmed. And you just tell them, well, we're going to lose everything if we don't wake up soon. So we'll see. It was her birthday, so I thought, that's a bit. But she reckons she's coming. Yeah. So again, I come back to the point that we need to change jurisdiction. So this is kind of what it's going to look like as we, in our jurisdiction, just so people know. I've been, it's interesting, Jack saying, sometimes it's really hard to get a hall. I've had meetings in warehouses that everyone had to park miles away and sneakily come into. There were people with walkie-talkies. This is during some of the, no more than, 10 were allowed to gather. So we all gathered. But so we had to sneakily do it in wiggly ways to get to this place, and then down came all the shutters, and then they had the spies out there with their walkie-talkies. And the idea was that if the police came anywhere near or anything happened that looked suspicious, the old, 10-4 rubber duck, they're coming, the geese is landed sort of stuff, So the plan was all the lights were going to go off, everyone had to be really quiet. And the funniest thing was I was going to be manhandled and I was going to be taken somewhere else. I thought it was hilarious. Oh, I mean, if they're coming for us, they're coming for us. I think I was going to be hidden somewhere, maybe in a cupboard, I'm not sure. Anyway, but, and we've had meetings in people's private gardens, just out in the stars. I had a meeting in Pukekoi or Karaka a little while ago, just in someone's farm shed. It was freezing. Everyone came with their rugs, and I was the only one unrugged and shaking my little knees. But, we need to be rallying together and just finding ways that we will meet. And if she is going to bring a mandate in, which I think she's looking at, what are we going to do? Well, if we change into our jurisdiction, we carry on. We carry on because someone has to be first out of the trenches. Someone has got to face off because it's fair. Yeah. It's fair that they know. Even Hitler said you can get people to do anything with fear, anything. Some of those Jews that got on those trains, when you look at the photographs, there's only one or two guards. They're holding guns, sure, but there's only one or two of them. If those people rebelled against those guards, they would have taken them out easily, but they didn't. They feared and they cooperated. So we mustn't cooperate. It's the same tactics. So we change our jurisdiction and we can make our land safe in He Whakaputanga jurisdiction under the Whakamaninga Māori government. So this is the way it goes. First, as an individual or as landowners. Now, if you're an apartment, I was asked, I'm an apartment. I said, well, you'll have to get that body corp. Everyone's going to have to sign. You can't, how do you own a bit of airspace? I'm not quite sure how that works. But if the body corp were to come to the party and secure the land, if it wasn't leasehold, I think that would be all right. But everyone needs to be a national of New Tarangi, so you need to change your jurisdiction. Then, if you're wanting to secure your land, you go on to the LINZ Land Information New Zealand, and you go into your record of title, and you get that downloaded and printed off. So once you've done that, it's looking a little bit better there. Computer register, record of title, and you find your record of title, and you'll need to just make sure everything's correct there. Once you get everything correct and you're happy with what that title is, now that's in the corporation jurisdiction, that will always stay there. They're not going to let go of it. It's always going to stay there. So even if you stayed within the corporation's jurisdiction and you went allodial, It's still going to be, their title's still going to be there. But you remember, that's corporation. We've got nothing to do with that. So what we'll do is we're going to bring our land title over to New Tirani, into the He Whakaputanga jurisdiction, Whakamaninga Māori government. So you fill that out. You'll need an ID photograph of yourself, maybe a driver's license or something like that, passport, or if you've already done your national ID card, you can use that. But it's just to make sure we match up this land with the right person that's on the records there. Then you send that into the Whakamaninga Māori government, and they will put it under a title called Whenua Rangatira, which is owners of the land. We're all Rangatira. This is our land. Once that's done, you will be invoiced for $25. Shock horror. Not much. I think we can live with that. And then your land is now registered under the lawful jurisdiction. So that means the corporation jurisdiction no longer owns that land. Yep, they're still going to have the title of it recorded, but they can do what they want. Of course, they're not going to let that go. Now, we've got a family, a friend of mine, really. She's a Hare Krishna lady, and she is up in the North Island, and they've lived on their land. It's now mortgage-free. They've got a community there. It's kind of extended family, really. They've brought in buildings. Been there 25 years plus. They've brought in buildings as families have grown and children have come along. And so that's where they live. Now, they've had the council running all over them like a rash this year. They've had a warrant, police have come on, all this bullying. Now, all of that is unlawful but legal, and they haven't known quite what to do. My friend, she's the grandmother, she is enrolled in our jurisdiction and has been for a couple of years, but the rest of the whānau there have been a little reluctant. I think they've been thinking, maybe common law or just keep battling them or whatever. But they're realising that day is gone. It's like people that used to take their number plates off and just put private. That day, it used to work. You were left alone, but you're not now. So that tells me they're coming for us. They're less tolerant now. They know we're on the rise, and they got to slap us on the head really fast. So anyway, we've got to now is that I got an email from her a couple of days ago. They're all enrolled. We're all good to go. And we've got people within our Whakamaninga Māori government that are good experts in common law, but we don't use common law in our jurisdiction because we live by honour, we live by the law, where if there's no victim, there's no crime. But we have to battle them. And so we meet them at the gate. And really what we're saying is, prove to me that you have that authority over me. And they will keep pushing back, of course, because they're looking for angles all the time. My friend and her whānau now have been given their final letter. They've got to be out by December. And this is what they've been accused of: having unpermitted house on the land. They came in and photographed everything. It's a solid house. Now, if you kind of think of the Christchurch earthquakes, most of the old houses before permitting stood. It was just the modern permitted ones that crumbled. So, got to kind of get your head round that. So their house obviously is an older house, or at least a wooden one that will manage. They've had that bought in, so it must have been permitted once upon a time. They've also been had for assembly because they're Hare Krishna group, but they're extended whānau, so they're, not allowed to assemble there anymore. And they've also been had for, he runs his business from home. Now, who doesn't? He runs his business from home, and they're saying that he's not allowed to do that without a permit. They need permits for all these things. So this is total control, and this is what they're doing. They're looking for the soft ones that they can target. Hare Krishnas are kind of peace at all price sort of type of livers, so they were always going to be easy. But anyway, we're at the verge now of our organising a Zoom with our common law people within our Whakamaninga Māori government, and we are going to tool them. It's not for us to battle. They need to learn how to stand in that authority under He Whakaputanga, but we will be there for them. Any documentation, we will be able to say, hey, look, this is the best approach for that. Because, as you know, if you're a common law, there's always a rebuttal that can be made. But our biggest weapon is that our jurisdiction's there and we have the Whakamaninga Māori government. Because, as I said before, we can't do it in our own mana, on our own sovereignty. They are coming for us. So when they say to me, you and what army, I can just step to one side and show them the Whakamaninga Māori government. That army, actually. Because we are growing. We've got about, someone asked, it's a splash in the bucket, but we've got just over 3,000 people enrolled with us. We've got another couple of thou on the edges that we're just processing. And hence we're getting around talking to people, because this will get us over the line. This is the components, there's 3 components which I'll be talking about in the next break that will get us over the line historically, so I know it will work. And this family will have our backing. And like I said to her, when they spent a day in our house just talking through, travelled over the couple of hours over, and we spent the day just talking through. And I said, look, you're going to have to be the first out of the trenches in our jurisdiction. As it stands, if you stay where you are, you're going down. So why don't you come into our jurisdiction, the whole community, and push back? Because A, you'll know you'll win, and B, there will be an end to it. But it doesn't mean that you won't keep getting pushback from this corporation. Of course that's going to happen, but sooner or later they'll have to let it go. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the next session, because we have, the Whakamaninga Māori government have been taken to court, and that's a very exciting place to be. As Georgie Jobe, the Prime Minister of the Whakamaninga Māori government, she said, we have been waiting for decades to be taken to court. They can't win, so this is a major, exciting position to be. But that's the land. So you get a title. You will be issued with a title in our jurisdiction. In native customary law, we are all custodians of the land. So in Māori terms, it's communal, but that doesn't mean that you share your preciously owned and paid for land. That is yours. No one's going to take it away from you. But just to get you to understand, and it's just like being a good steward, really. I mean, we're all stewards of the land. But I know some people are a little bit worried, will Māori take my land? No, they won't take your land. You get your title, but it puts you into a safe jurisdiction. And conversely, Māori will not have their land taken either, and we know that there are some land that's theirs, and really, at the end of the day, we won't have all this stupid Waitangi land claim, which I've been a part of for a hapu near where I live. It's just been a years-old dilemma for them, but they got their land, hundreds and hundreds of acres of land back a couple of years ago. But then, they lost it, because they went into partnership with DOC. It's an NGO of United Nations. But I didn't have the heart to tell them that. But I thought, when you used to own it, was DOC around when you used to own it? No. But anyway, that's what they've done. But we'll get through that one. So there are questions. So let's have some.
What about mana whenua who didn't sign the treaty?
They signed the declaration?
They didn't sign. There's a lot of mana whenua who didn't sign the treaty.
Of Waitangi?
That's right.
Okay, well, I don't know what it would mean for them, but the thing is, when we're thinking about He Whakaputanga as our remedy, our jurisdiction, we're talking about what it looks like now, what it looks like as we transition, and what it looks like when we win. So if they didn't sign any treaty, once we win, they will have whatever theirs is back, unless it's, I can't speak into that, because maybe some of it's now privately owned land, so I don't know. But this is the way I do see it. At the moment we're at war. We have got discussions and action needed now. When we're at peace, we can have some peacetime discussions, and what might that look like? But at the moment, we've got to stay focused. We've got to have our army boots on and our helmets on, and we need to be engaged in this war. So if you've got questions like that, email. I had a meeting in Otaki, and a lady had a couple of questions, Māori lady, she had a couple of questions I couldn't answer. And I gave her my little writer's card, and she emailed me, and I got that off to the Prime Minister of the Whakaputanga Māori government, Georgie Job, and the same day she answered all those, and I was able to email it back. So if I can't answer questions, or Glenn can't answer questions, that doesn't mean we can't get the answers for you. It just means you'll need to email me. Yeah. Oh, yeah, thank you.
The real short version of it, and you probably didn't ask the whole question anyway, but the short version of it is the treaty was an attempt by the Crown to get sovereignty back, because they recognised that Whakaputanga had given us sovereignty.
Yeah.
So they came out here to try and swindle us, all of us, but presenting it as a Māori treaty. The English version means nothing, because in international law, local language takes precedence in treaty and contract. So forget the English version. And then Henry Williams, the same guy that wrote Whakaputanga, was asked to step in because Hobson had a stroke, and so he got the job of doing it. So he made sure that the Te Reo versions said that they did not hand over sovereignty, and so it's the Rangitirotanga section of that, which means that all that the treaty did was underscore Whakaputanga.
Yep.
And so the sovereignty stands.
I have that on my copy.
Yeah. Right. Any other question on that one? Or? Yeah, good. Okay.
I just question why you've got the word government. Under common law, we're learning the government as a legalese term for governing your mentality.
Were you here in just the last session? Maybe you weren't here. Oh, okay. I talked about that word government. Okay, so I'll go a bit further. In our jurisdiction, we choose the definition. We don't have the Black Law Dictionary in our jurisdiction. The word is the word. So if you get the Oxford English Dictionary, the other thing is we all know English is contractual language, French is the love language, the language of love. We've got the contractual. If we're not careful, we'll have no vocabulary left. But besides the point, in our jurisdiction, what it says in the good old Oxford Common Dictionary is what it is. Over in the corporation jurisdiction, they have the Black Law Dictionary. So they speak legalese. And that's not English, that's legalese. So when you come into our jurisdiction, don't worry about your surname. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about the word registration. Because in our jurisdiction, it doesn't mean the same as legalese. Having said that, we are tidying up a lot of our vocabulary. But having said that, if we tidied up too much, people won't know what we're meaning. So this is what it looks like now as we transition and what it will look like. Yeah. So government is not a top-down government. It's an administrative service government to the side. It serves the people. It is not over the people. We have the authority. It goes God, then us, and then anything man-made under us. And as I'll explain again in the next session, the Whakaputanga and the policy of the Whakaputanga Māori government put all the power back at the people's level, which is what it was. That's customary, native customary law. So hapu, local Whakaputanga, your local community, you have the power and the government. You do it. And I'll explain and unwrap that a lot more in the next session. So I'm just thinking maybe... okay, just one question, then we'll stop and...
Thank you. I'm new to all of this. I'm just finding my footing to work out how to support myself. And I've heard that Lotus Heart Restaurant Level 1 had some success in the courts using Kingdom of David. And I'm just wondering if you can help me understand the difference between what's happening here and what I'm learning today and what Kingdom of David.
Right, well, I know very little about, so to be quick, I know very little about the Kingdom of David. I believe it's someone that felt that they had rights to the throne. But from my point of view, if you weren't on the throne, sorry. I think the Kingdom of David might be better appropriated in a different country than our country. So some people are Kingdom of David. I have got friends that are Kingdom of David and with He Whakaputanga, because you have freedom of association. So if that's not a conflict of interest for you, we're all looking for freedom, that's not a problem. So that's the quick answer. And maybe one more, yeah.
I was just going to ask, who are the members of the Maori government?
Yep, next session.
Great.
Yep.
Is there any hang-up transferring the title for people that have anything on their titles, like mortgages?
No, is the quick answer. There's a little bit more.
Sorry, what's the question?
If you've got a mortgage on your title, that whole mortgage thing is a whole can of worms in its own right. So we'll stop now. But the quick answer is no, that you still can move forward on that. Yeah. You want to get them out of trust, because trust is the corporation. So if you've got a trust, I know trusts are particularly hard to get out of, so just do your due diligence. I don't like telling people, hey, get out of that. But trusts are controlled in Wellington. So it means you've contracted. So you just need to be careful that it's in your flesh and blood name.
Short thing on trusts is we do have the ability to do them within Māori government. We just don't need to.
Right. Okay. So what? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. I'd need to. Yeah. I'll leave that there because I'd need to. There's a few things whizzing around in my head now. So yeah. So but that. Yeah. Any questions though that you think after today, you can always email me. And Jacques. I just thought maybe Glenn. I should just introduce you to Jacques. Have I done that already? Maybe I haven't. Jack's. Oh. Jack, sorry. Did I introduce you earlier on? I don't know. Let's stop for a break. We'll give it 10 minutes and then we'll come back for the last session.